In the late 17th century, the leader of the Zaporozhian siege, Ivan Sirko, reached the French port of Dunkirk with his Cossack fleet, and his trade caravan sailed to the Mediterranean, and the Turks did not dare to object to this. However, after Sirko's death, his fleet fell into decay, and the Sultan of the Ottoman Porte surrounded the estuary of the Dnipro and Danube with fortresses. It meant Ukraine lost access to the sea. This continued until another great figure, Ivan Mazepa, became hetman. He restored the shipyards, financed the construction of over 70 Chaika Cossack boats, and equipped the fleet with everything necessary. It was at the instigation of Mazepa that Russian Tsar Peter the Great broke through to the Black and Azov seas. Between 1691 and 1695, Cossack leader Maxim Samoylenko carried out large sea voyages to the Black and Azov seas. Cossacks captured all the Turkish fortresses on the Dnipro and placed their garrisons there. During the Azov campaign by Peter I, the Cossack fleet blocked the Ottoman squadron, and this enabled Russian troops to storm the fortress of Azov. Then, Tsar Peter understood that it was impossible to fight against the Ottoman Empire without a powerful fleet. Therefore, he decided to build shipyards in Berdyansk and Voronezh, and Cossacks worked there as shipbuilders. Russia had no fleet in the Black Sea until the end of the 18th century. Yes, Peter I built several ships for the Sea of Azov. The Cossacks took Azov in 1696, but after defeat in the Prut campaign in 1711, Russia lost the Azov coast up to the second half of the 18th century. Therefore, the only fleet was the Cossack fleet. The Ottoman Empire had a powerful fleet, and the Cossacks had no chance of fighting against it. The power of the Turkish navy was only challenged in the 17th century, and it was through a coalition of European states. The first failures of the Russian fleet in the Azov and Caspian seas made Peter I abandon the idea of moving towards the coast in the south. Therefore, he decided to pave the way to the sea in the north, and he started with the construction of St. Petersburg, which was to become a naval base. It was supposed to become the window to Europe, and the Cossacks were to have been involved in cutting through this window. After hetman Ivan Mazepa renounced the Russian protectorate and the Zaporozhian siege was destroyed by Peter I's army, thousands of captured Cossacks were sent to the so-called Line to build St. Petersburg in the northern wetlands. The surviving remnants of the Cossacks were forced to emigrate to the protectorate of the Turkish Sultan. However, very soon a part of these immigrant Cossacks again returned to the Russian protectorate and established the new siege on the Pitpilna River. The new siege, headed by Petro Kalnyshevsky, could provide access to the sea in Kherson region near the Zaporozhian Cossack settlement of Prohnoevska Polanka, and there was also the Kalmius Polanka on the Sea of Azov, with its center in Domaha, modern-day Mariupol. Cossacks began to rebuild a new fleet for new wars against the Ottoman Empire, and the traditional Chaikas were no longer the main strike force of this fleet. The siege already had seaports and access to the sea, so it was possible to build large-capacity ships. Therefore, Cossack leaders, known as Ottomans, began to introduce the naval ship specialization. Small, discreet, but speedy Cossack Chaika boats were good for reconnaissance or ambush missions. They also carried the Coastal Guard service, but combat operations were carried out with the help of large tonnage battleships. Thus, there was parity between the Ukrainian and Turkish fleets. In other words, the Cossack state, having seaports and trade relations with the Mediterranean, became a geopolitical force in the region. During Cossack times in Ukraine, a balance between the geopolitical sea power and land power was restored in Ukraine. Cossacks had outposts on land, from which they conducted their sharp actions against their enemies in the sea. Who was the enemy of Cossacks? First and foremost, it was the Ottoman Porte. The Cossacks wandered foreign parts for a long time, until Russian Empress Anna Ioannovna, planning a new war against the Ottoman Empire, proposed to them that they join the Russian Empire once again and to settle in places of the defeated siege. And already in 1736, the Zaporizhian fleet became Russia's main strike on the Black Sea. First, Ivan Malashevich stormed the Turkish fortress of Kinburn with a small squadron, where he captured the entire enemy artillery and a large warship as trophies. He then conducted a raid on the Dniester estuary with the Cossack fleet, where he blocked the Turkish squadron, and this enabled General Minich's army to safely enter Crimea. The new siege was under the protectorate of Russia, and the Cossack fleet was actively involved in the Russian-Turkish wars of 1768 to 1774 and 1787 to 1791, until the Russian fleet was built, and most of the sailors in Russia's Imperial Navy were from Ukraine. Evaluating the combat success of the Cossack fleet, Russian imperial leaders decided to make it the basis for a powerful, ultra-modern Black Sea flotilla. It was for this reason that Admiral Sinyavin came to the Cossack siege in 1738. He agreed with Cossack leader Ivan Beletsky to establish two Cossack shipyards on the Desna River above Kiev and on the island of Upper Hortitsa. At these shipyards, they had to manufacture 20 brigantines and a certain number of small vessels annually. It was also agreed that the Cossack naval leaders would receive military officer titles in the new fleet, as well as the status of nobles. Meanwhile, the famous Cossack flotilla of Ivan Malashevich continued to storm Turkish fortresses and was involved in reconnaissance and taking supplies for General Minich's army, which fought in Crimea. As for the 1768 to 1774 Russian-Turkish War, the only fleet of the Russian Empire on the Black Sea at the time was the Zaporizhian fleet. Naval Cossacks took an active part in the Battle of Achakiv, later Ismail, but that was the next Russian-Turkish War. It was the Cossack flotilla led by Danilo Tretyak that inflicted a crushing defeat in 1771 on the Turkish squadron near Achakiv that became the turning point in the war. In the same year, naval Cossacks landed troops on the Kinburn Spit and defeated the most efficient detachments of the Crimean Khan. Taking into account the ability of Cossacks to go deep into the enemy's rear, Russian Empress Catherine II personally requested the Cossacks to carry out reconnaissance of the Turkish bases, communications, and anchorage of the Ottoman fleet. Another important task for the Cossacks was drawing locations in naval maps for future military operations. The Russian Naval Ministry considered them of great importance. The campaign was led by Cossack Ottoman Yakov Sidlovsky. After heavy fighting, the Cossack flotilla reached the Turkish fortresses of Kilia, Ismail, Machin, Brailov, and Silistria. During the campaign, Cossacks maintained a log of depths, measurements of currents, and other indicators. For keeping this log, Empress Catherine II bestowed members of the campaign with personalized gold and silver medals. Ottoman Yakov Sidlovsky was killed in battle, so was awarded posthumously. However, this campaign almost became the last glorious episode of the Cossack fleet. In 1774, the Russian Empire concluded a peace treaty with the Ottoman Porte, according to which Cossack lands were expropriated and shared out between Tatars, Balkan Slavs specially settled here, and Russian nobles. When the Cossacks began to rebel, Catherine II ordered the destruction of the Zaporizhian siege, and this time it was destroyed completely. Over time, free Cossacks were turned into bound peasants. However, naval skills continued to live in the descendants of the Cossacks. Therefore, the Russian Empire recruited those born on Zaporizhian lands into the Black Sea fleet, and they showed themselves to be wonderful sailors. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856 showed that the Black Sea fleet of Russia was staffed in the main with Ukrainians. They suffered the brunt of the Crimean War, and the most famous hero of that war was sailor Petro Kishka, who, as a marine infantryman and a saboteur, actively carried out attacks. Subsequently, the Imperial Russian government held a Congress of Veterans Heroes of the Crimean War. The participants of the Congress posed for a joint photo. The signatures under the photo showed that the vast majority of veteran heroes had Ukrainian surnames. Therefore, it's not surprising that in fact, by the early 20th century, most of the seamen in the fleets of the Russian Empire were Ukrainians. Therefore, when in February 1917, the democratic revolution took place in the Russian Empire and every nation received an opportunity for independent development, Ukrainian sailors organized their revolutionary committees. In particular, in the Baltic Fleet, Ukrainian national flags were raised on the cruiser Svetlana and the destroyers Ukraina and Haidamaka. There was also Ukrainianization on the northern Caspian Amur flotillas of the Russian Imperial Fleet, and the Black Sea Squadron was put under Ukrainian jurisdiction. On April 29, 1918, a century ago, blue and yellow Ukrainian flags were raised on ships of the Russian Black Sea Navy fleet, and this inspired Pavlo Skoropadsky to carry out a coup in the Ukrainian People's Republic and become the hetman, or head of state. And he started a serious policy to build a Ukrainian navy. It's worth mentioning that the awareness-raising group Kobzar in Sevastopol, the main base of the fleet in Crimea, had existed since the 1905 revolution. The group included many middle-ranking and high-ranking naval officers. These officers conducted an active campaign in favor of Ukraine in their crews. Therefore, in early 1917, the majority of ships in coastal garrisons included Ukrainian committees. The commander of the Black Sea Fleet, Admiral Alexander Kolchak, contributed to the Ukrainian national revival, because Ukrainianized ships maintained order and discipline, while anarchy and revolutionary hysteria dominated in other ships. Later, Kolchak was removed from office precisely because he allowed the Ukrainian riot, as was written in the telegram from the Russian Provisional Government. But his successor, Rear Admiral Mikhail Sablin, also had to endure the Ukrainian national movement. The only force that still tried to resist Ukrainianization was the Bolsheviks. Despite the fact that Sablin ordered the raising of yellow and blue flags, Bolshevik provocateurs and agitators spread rumors that German troops and not Ukrainian troops were approaching Crimea to take the fleet and occupy the territory of Crimea. Therefore, a significant number of ships left the harbors and fell into the hands of the Bolsheviks. Anarchy dominated throughout the Russian Empire at the time. The central government, the provisional government, did not control the regions. Moreover, the Ukrainian government, the Central Rada, had no influence on Ukraine. Therefore, General Pavlo Skoropadsky decided to preclude the Central Rada from making political decisions. As for the fleet, Hetman Skoropadsky announced, the crew and ship owners should, in a democratic way, determine which flag would be raised on their ship mast. And then it turned out that most ships preferred the Ukrainian flag. It's easy to explain why. Russian Bolsheviks announced the nationalization of all private means of production, and the Ukrainian state considered private property to be inviolable. In addition, the Germans, who were allies of Pavlo Skoropadsky, did not wish to share their ships, especially merchant ones, with the Bolsheviks. The Germans gathered the ambassadors of the Ukrainian state and Soviet Russia into one office and set them a condition to agree. Otherwise, they wouldn't leave the office. Therefore, the ships were divided up only on paper. But then Skoropadsky regime fell, and the issue of the fleet lost its urgency for the UNR Directory. It was because of this simple reason that the Ukrainian state lost access to the sea under the Directory. Because in February 1919, Crimea and southern Ukraine were occupied by Entente troops and the White Guards of Russian monarchists. But that's the topic of our next program. Remember that each phenomenon has its pros and cons. It's pro at Contra.